right, good evening, everybody. Well, just kind of playing around here with some YouTube live stuff and just messing around, trying to figure out the best way of using this OBS um, screen capture streaming onto YouTube live, working out some kinks for our podcast. And so just kind of testing that out here to see what will happen. All right, good evening. Well, still in the process of working through with this OBS system, streaming through YouTube Live, working on some things for the podcast here. And so just kind of messing around, trying to see if we can figure out the best way of doing this here. So what I'm doing is my cohort and I have been trying to use our podcasting software to be able to figure out the best way to run a broadcast of our episodes. And so we were kind of thinking that YouTube Live might be the best. The recording software that we had wasn't working out very well. His voice was coming through kind of light, and then even when we went to recording both in the same room, the mics that we had weren't very good. So just been kind of playing around, self-taught here with streaming live through YouTube. So working through some of the kinks here with it, and so we'll see what we can get here. Anyway, while I'm using this, I thought I would take the opportunity now to talk a little bit about some of the events of the week, maybe talk a little bit about some of what we've got here going on in relation to Charlottesville. My cohort and I are going to talk about that more tomorrow, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going over that. But what I did want to go through and talk a little bit about here is I saw a lot on Facebook this week, obviously in relation to the Confederacy. And, it's easy in this day and age to get to a point where, you are boiling everything down to a meme, that you've got, these talking points. And I know I've mentioned it before in my podcast about how I believe that discussion via social media can be a very daunting task, because whatever it might be, the audience, the message, whatever it is, it's just not a very conducive way for debate or dialogue. And so, having said that, there seem to be some messages floating around this week, that basically kind of deteriorated over the week. It initially just kind of started with whatever these Nazi skinheads were that were gathering in Charlottesville, to certainly tying that into Confederacy, to where I saw, I read an article from the International Business Journal this week that talked about making the equivalency between the Confederacy and Nazi Germany, which I absolutely wholeheartedly disagree with. And then even, just again to kind of see people talking about just the idiocy of the idea of the Confederacy. There were just a number of articles that were written about the lost cause, the sentiment of having to honor the generals and war heroes from the South, and just talking a little bit about that. And so I don't know. I guess I I took a stab a little bit on Facebook, a jab at, look, this populist eighth grade history that gets floated around on social media is unfortunate, because oftentimes what it does is there's so many people that are reading that, and that's what they get. That's the extent of their historical knowledge on the topic is left at that. So I think that's unfortunate. I really do. I think that there are probably a lot of really well-intentioned, good people that just don't simply realize that, what they hear and what they see is not an accurate depiction and account, and it just floors me, that people will fall victim to that. And I want to put a disclaimer in here with this. I know teaching history and government. Listen, I'm not an expert. I'll never come across or claim to be an expert in any one topic of history. Now, I have some areas of knowledge that I feel pretty good and pretty comfortable with, some things that I've studied pretty extensively, that I feel like I've put a lot of time and effort and developed an understanding on, and I would feel comfortable in defending my beliefs about various different things and people and stuff of that nature. But I certainly would never want to intend to come across as saying, right, wrong, or whatever. I know a lot of, determining history and how you view it. You can see things from different perspectives and whatnot. But I want to talk for just a minute about this idea of just flat out dismissing the Confederacy and, seeing that it was this lost cause notion that was oftentimes gets talked about. It's unfortunate that happened. So I'm going to talk for just a little bit today about that. I want to address that here in just a quick short video here. Again, kind of really just taking a look at how this plays out with using YouTube Live. So before I get started here, I just want to check out a couple of things in relation to YouTube Live, and then I'll kind of get started here. So give me just 1 second before I jump into this here. All right. Okay. So here's the thing. Like I said, I mentioned that I read articles and saw people making comparisons on social media of the Confederacy, to Nazism, and I think that's just low-level, lowest common denominator logic. And we can argue about this all we want, debate it, but the bottom line is that if you want to go to slavery and use that as, look, the South was wrong, for their stance on slavery, right, wrong, or indifferent about the strategy of it, obviously I'm not going to try to sit here and defend that. That's ridiculous. Nobody is going to say that slavery, was a just cause to fight for. That it was nothing that I can come up with or anything, would ever come close to saying that. I do think it's interesting, though, those who want to point out slavery in the South are quick to either ignore or avoid the fact that it existed in the North as well. That it wasn't like there was some magical line. Many people think the Potomac River, and that, slavery just existed south of that. It didn't exist to the north. That's just patently false. And there have been many examples of prominent people in society that were slaveholders to the north. And I wouldn't even go here to say this. I wouldn't even go here to say, well, but in the North they treated their slaves better than they did in the South, and so that justifies, that logic there is just absolutely ridiculous. And I saw that start to play out. I read an article earlier this week from Yahoo. Some guy from, I believe, George Washington University wrote an article on Yahoo in which he, the thesis of it was, or the topic of it was on Trump, when he mentioned, okay, well, if we're going to attack Lee and all these guys from the Confederates, and why aren't we taking down Thomas Jefferson and George Washington memorials and statues? And so it went from, not just talking about slavery as, immoral, but it was, well, we can rationalize it from the North because at least those guys were treating their slaves better than they were in the South. Like somehow that justified it, I guess. But at any rate, I think that's a really weak argument to stand on, but one that I've seen kind of subtly used in discussion. So I want to clear the air with that. If we're going to analyze the immoral act of slavery, we have to be prepared to blanket that with all of the Union, not just the South. The other aspect to this that I want to try to address is, and I've had discussions and debate, in a lot of different ways with people on this. And I'm never going to get people who don't agree with this to come around, and people aren't going to get me to not, believe what I do, because I just feel like I've read enough, I've put enough context into it to feel comfortable enough with my standing in this, and that, I believe that the Civil War was not wholly about slavery, and I don't even know to what degree it was, at least from the Southern perspective. Now, what did it look like to Lincoln and his cabinet? I can make an argument there too that, it really wasn't about slavery. It was more about control and things of that nature. But the unfortunate thing is that if you get people to try to read the history of what was going on, you're going to lose them. If you get people to try to read rational discussions and documents that were being written about why the South had a right to secede from the Union, they're just going to gloss it over and jump right back into, slavery. And that's unfortunate, again, because I really think that if people were being intellectually honest and given an honest listen or read or chance, that they would find out that, wait a second, there were some serious questions in here about what the Union was doing and what Lincoln was doing, and that's really kind of what I wanted to focus on. So since we're in this era or time period of lowest common denominator history, let me try to break it down like this. And I've been thinking through this a little bit. This is kind of spitballing it, but it's the best that I could come up with in my thoughts this week, And it's, basically like this. Look, if you're living with a roommate, if you're in a situation where you live in an apartment, condo, house, and you got a roommate, right? And you've entered into an agreement, right? You've entered into an agreement that either one or both of you is on the lease or whatever it might be. Maybe it's just you, and you're just kind of doing it as a handshake thing. Like, hey, I'll allow you to live here. You pay me X amount of rent. You pay the utilities, this percentage of it, whatever it is. You have come up with an agreement for your living arrangements. And so, you're going about your business and everything is good. And then you find out something about this person, something so disturbing and upsetting to you that you no longer want to be a part of this relationship that you've got, this contract that you've made. Maybe it's that this person is abusive to other people, and so now you're worried about your safety. And so, you think it over and you decide that, even though we have this agreement, whether it's something written or a gentleman's handshake agreement, whatever it might be, that you have decided that you want to cut this thing off. And that you feel like the reason why is so compelling that you are within your right to say, I no longer want to be a part of this agreement. Well, I don't think anybody's going to blame you for that. I don't think anybody's going to look at you and say, if you have serious concerns about your safety, don't you know that you signed a contract? Aren't you thinking about what that's going to do to that individual once you kick them out and put them out of this arrangement? No, they're going to say, hey, look, you're right. That you don't agree with what they're doing. Now, you don't have any actual proof that this person has intention to hurt you or harm you, but you just feel like it's in the best interest for you and your preservation to cut this thing off and part ways. And so, you go to do that. But within that too, you also understand that, you're not a perfect person, that you maybe have some skeletons in your closet, so to speak, or maybe some things that you're not really proud of that you've done. And so, this person would, instead of trying to use that against you, just simply wants to say, okay, let's just part ways. I'm willing to do that. And the fact that you would be free and able to do that is an important part of having the right to form these contracts and the right to be able to break them when something like this occurs. And so, this isn't a situation where you just woke up one day and said, hey, I don't feel like this is working out. We need to just end it, right? There's not an arbitrary reason for why you're doing this. And that's I guess the best equation that I can come up with from a, I don't know, modern standard or, easiest analogy that I can come up with as to maybe try to explain why the South was justified in doing what they did. If you go back and study the history of the compact that was made with the ratification of the Constitution, if you clearly read historical documents and texts and interpretations of what people from that era were saying about this, it's very clear and evident that everybody pretty much felt like, hey, look, this is a compact. We're entering into this agreement, each of us individually. And look, not everybody was on board with it at first. There were a lot of naysayers. The states, it took a while for them, some of them at least, to come around to this idea. And you can see pretty quickly that there are some challenges to what the national government was doing with its power. Its power that was created through the ratification of the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists were very worried about states' rights. They were very worried about what was going to happen, to their ability to govern their own affairs locally. And so, the principles of '98 with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which were essentially pushbacks to the Alien Sedition Acts, which, by the way, that's the thing that I think is really interesting too about this. Slavery being something that, as I said, I haven't come across a rational human being who is trying to say like, well, look, the southern states, they really should have been able to continue on with slavery, and they were going to continue to build a slave empire. Now whether they were going to do that or not, yeah, I don't know. I've read both. I've read opinions both ways on that. But the bottom line is not necessarily so much about the determination of slavery, but the determination of states and local rights. And so, if you want to cut yourself off from that and move on, I believe that the southern states had a right to do that. And, by and large, I don't understand from a philosophical perspective where the problem is in understanding that. Certainly you can look at many examples in history where particular countries have had human rights violations, and we've turned a blind eye or a deaf ear to it. For goodness sake, all you have to do is watch Hotel Rwanda to see that. And as I encourage a lot of my my classes in thinking about, the unfortunate idea of American exceptionalism and manifest destiny, and us getting involved in other countries, we pick and choose. It's moral relativism. It's outrage at one thing, but just dumb willingness to not admit or see what goes on in other places. And I think the bottom line is because that there aren't any interests, economic interests, in those areas where we choose to ignore, atrocities. So to get this holier than thou, virtuous, Lincoln was doing this to save the Union and to free the blacks. Certainly there is some grain of truth to that, but the manner in which it was done is what we need to look at. And so I don't think that when you look at how things happen there, and the amount of lives that were lost, and money that was wasted, why it should have happened that way, why it shouldn't have happened where the South could secede from this compact, this union, and go about it their separate way. And I always talk about when you have the right ideas, when you have the truth on your side, eventually you're going to prevail. And so I guess I would have been much better justified, I guess, in my beliefs if I would have been the North to say, look, we've got a moral superiority here, superior position. We're willing to roll the dice on this, and we're going to abolish slavery and move forward, building out a nation that doesn't promote this any longer. And you choke it out that way. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent. Why the South had, the North had to see the South as their justification for forcing them to come back into the Union through the gun. I struggle with that. I struggle to understand that, with the amount of lives that were lost. And look, I mean, obviously there were, all kinds of people that were unfortunately lost. You have brother killing brother, countrymen killing countrymen, white killing black, black killing white. It's just an ugly thing all the way around. And just again, as somebody that would advocate for the non-aggression policy, I guess I would never had seen war as the best option for this. So again, I kind of see, going back to what I was referencing earlier, is this idea that the South having the political and legal authority to nullify Northern laws that they found to be egregious, and you can read about that in the South Carolina Declaration of Secession. They lay that argument out very well. You don't hear a lot about the argument that was made there by the government of South Carolina. You'll hear historians and other people pick and choose other different things out of that, but you won't ever hear somebody talk about that very often. And then I encourage you to read some other things as well. I was talking to my class on Friday about just the whole benefit and whatnot of primary source reading it for yourself. Don't take another when I read an article and I see historians agree, or historians are all in agreement, that to me, I don't even want to listen to that, because first off, who is it? Who are you talking about when you say all historians, or most historians, or some prominent historians? That's another one that gets used oftentimes in articles, is prominent historians. It's I want to know the names, because then that's going to tell me a lot about who this is that is being used as a justification for the stance that's being taken. So I encourage you to read the primary sources yourself and make that determination. Read John C. Calhoun's Disquisition on Government. Read some of the writings from for example, Jefferson. Read some stuff from even like Lee himself had some writings to his wife that were really quite interesting on the topic of slavery and things of that nature. So I just want to encourage you guys that as you come across these things and see them, think about them, don't be contented to just take the lazy man's approach. Really dive into them and explore them in more detail and depth. And think on your own. I used to hear a popular radio host that would say, unplug the matrix cable from the back of your head. And again, it's more of just a sad commentary on where we are today as a society with how we deem and justify history. And so again, tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about what specifically happened in Charlottesville. We're going to kind of just ad-lib that a little bit and just kind of go through and talk a little bit about some of what actually went down there, and what the response has been from the various different sides of this unfortunate situation, which continues to look like it's going to grow over time. But what can we do as thoughtful, rational people to have responses to people when we come in contact with them, when we're having discussions with people in the hallway or at the water cooler or on our Facebook page? What is it that we can say from a logical, rational perspective that will try to get people to understand that we can't boil this down into meme type mentality, or just the lazy man's approach to understanding the history of what was going on there. So anyway, that's again my 2 cents for the night on this. Again, nothing real academic here with this, but certainly just kind of had some thoughts on my mind that I wanted to get out there. And again, it just more importantly, just to encourage you that if you are in a position where you read a lot of this stuff and it angers you, and you see what's going on in the country and you're upset, I want you guys to understand that people like myself. I'm sickened by this. I am, just as upset as the next person is about, what went down in Charlottesville and what the alt-right continues to spew out, just as much as I am against Antifa and what they stand for. And, ultimately at the end of the day, I stand for liberty. I stand for freedom. I stand for choice. I want people to be able to self-determine and make those decisions on their own, at least as much as they can in today's society. And so I want to make that very clear, because I think oftentimes when I go to these talking points, people want to look at it and say, oh, clearly you're just a Confederacy sympathizer. You would still like slavery to be in existence today, so on and so forth. And nothing could be further from the truth. There's a prominent libertarian that I listen to quite often named Tom Woods, and he ran into a little bit of a spat this past week with the Libertarian Party chair over not wanting to sign a petition denouncing the alt-right. And he said, look, I don't need to sign this petition because it's the furthest thing from it in my worldview. Why do I feel like I need to justify myself by signing some stupid petition about thoughts and ideas that I'm not even close to, right? It's not even anywhere on my radar. And so I hope people understand that when I talk about sympathizing with the South in terms of their right to secession, that I do that from a position of political theory and governance, not from the fact that I would be a sympathizer for slavery or anything of that nature. I definitely don't want to get that point out there and have people thinking that. So at any rate, again, I hope you are maybe moved to read through and look at some stuff on this. And if you have any questions, I've got all kinds of resources that I can shoot your way. But until then, I think we'll call it a wraps for tonight and see if we can get this thing set up for tomorrow. Again, my cohort Mike Margison will be on with me tomorrow. We'll be talking a little bit more specifically about Charlottesville. And until then, have a good evening.